Great to be with you again on Locked On Texas Tech on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day, always free and available on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts. And thanks as always for making us your first listen. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs better with FanDuel. And new customers can bet only $5 and get $200 in bonus bets. Guaranteed win or lose right now. So visit FanDuel.com to get started with the only Chris Level. I'm Casey Cowan. Chris, great to be back with you once again for another Locked On Texas Tech special edition. It's the Matador Mob Mailbag as we are turning over the reins, well, to you out there and your questions, your takes as we wrap up the week. So another full bucket here today, Chris. Let's not waste any time. Let's get started. Question number one, the most popular question, and I'll paraphrase for a few of you, but many of you asking about one JT Toppen. You all right? There's talk of body language, Chris. There's talk of returning from injury. There's talk of whether or not maybe defensively an opponent figured something out as it relates to JT Toppen. But we had several who were chiming in this time around asking about JT, and for obvious reason, you know, we know what he can be, obviously, for Texas Tech, so going to be a very important piece for the Red Raiders throughout Big 12 play. But heard from Mike, heard from Tammy, heard from Bob, heard from Jeremy, heard from Hayden, and I may be missing a few regarding the Red Raider big man. What do you think, man, about the last 7 to 10 days for JT?
Yeah, you know, he had the big game against UCF statistically, and you lost. And then obviously he averaged, I think, like 8 points, 2 boards a game in about 15 minutes per in the 2-game trip to Utah, which is, you know, quite a bit below what we had been used to seeing from those averages in the non-conference. There's several things here. One, I mean, the play gets a bit tougher. You try to take certain guys away. I think, you know, UCF basically elected, as you kind of went to him on the block, UCF elected to let him go and not double, and he was able to knock down some of those shots. He had some of those same looks, I think, versus BYU early in that game, for instance, and just wasn't able to knock him down. Now, the Utah game, he large in part there, he's not a factor there because he picks up 2 quick fouls. And then he can't be a factor the remainder of the first half. And then you blow these guys out in the second half, and you don't – it's like you took the foot off the gas with some of your rotational guys and things like that. But he – you know, I will say this about JT. When he was inserted – for about a 3 or 4 minute span in the first half against Utah, you like immediately went on an 8-0 run, and you set the tone going into the locker room with that one. So, yeah, I'm not in any way concerned about JT. The beauty of it is there is no problem here, and if you see some body language or like he's pretty even keel, he doesn't really get too high or too low. But, I mean, I'm sure if you see some frustration, it's probably because he's not playing as well as he knows he can. And he's the least of your concerns right now. I mean, remember how poorly Darion Williams played against Texas A&M and Fort Worth? Because it wasn't very good. And you know, the game is tough. The league is tough. Wait till you see what Iowa State tries to do to some of these kids on your team in the coming days or hours or whatever it is. It just is going to get a lot tougher. And some guys have a night, some guys don't. But the beautiful thing is, I mean, and for all that we talked about how great JT Toppen was, and like, man, Elijah Hawkins is making me a little bit nervous. Shoe, other foot. I mean, it's just kind of, but this is a basketball season. And there'll be more ups and downs and trials and tribulations along the way. But, yeah, JT, and I get the question because but the beautiful thing is you look at ways to win. I kind of thought as you were starting out the season, he's got to play really well, or like who else is it, or where else do you go? And now you look at it and go, our basketball team is evolving. We have other options. There's other paths to victory here. And I think it's a huge positive, if anything.
Yeah, and Tammy did mention something you alluded to there, like is it just part of his personality or disposition? Because everybody has their own way of kind of operating on the court, and the surface doesn't always reveal what's happening, obviously, on the inside. Mike had a kind of a second question about Toppen, asking about the game translating to the NBA. We know that was a big part of his story as far as those looks from the professional level whenever he arrived in Lubbock, Chris. But how do you see it translating to the next level?
So I think, and you can tell, and Grant's willing to live with him taking these shots, but there's some times where JT will pull the trigger on a 3-point attempt at the top of the key, maybe even early in the shot clock. Yeah. This is which everybody's looking at each other going, oh, what are we doing? This is what the NBA wants to see from him and see him be better. I'm not gonna just totally rule out that somebody like D5 or somebody like JT would return to college for another year because of NIL and because of rev sharing and all those things. There's some tweener to them. They are not just because, I mean, JT's definitely, in my opinion, and have I seen an exact measurement? Have I seen him on a scale with a measuring tape? No. I'm about 6'5", maybe close to 6'6". I'm going to say that JT's probably closer to 6'7" than he is 6'9". And gotcha. So with that, you're a wing on most NBA rosters, and you got to have some perimeter presence. It doesn't mean that, because the post players in the association are, you're either like 6'6", 280, and you're built like a truck like Zion Williamson, or you're 7'2" like Giannis, or one of those. So as far as it translating, I just don't know if there's this is why he's back in college, though, because he doesn't check every box. I mean, there's some tweener to him, and it may be eye of the beholder, and there's no guarantee with anything here. Like, that's the thought. And the same thing with D5, but I'm not ready to, I mean, I'm sure if you could figure it out, man, you could potentially have, I mean, because we're sitting here talking, and this is a day before. We're sitting here talking to the day before you have a guy like Carson Beck at Georgia, who everybody thought is a bona fide first-round draft pick, quarterback and Heisman Trophy candidate, and then he gets a little dinged up, and all of a sudden it's like, you know what? I think I may put my name in the portal. I think I may come back to college. Well, I mean, it's all this stuff's all on the table. So I'm just giving you that for context, but yeah, I wouldn't. Yeah, we'll see kind of what happens and what it looks like as it plays out. But the NBA definitely wants to see more perimeter skill from somebody like him. But he's really good inside. I mean, really good. And so we'll see.
Yeah. Or can we send a message if they're watching back to the NBA, like, hey, see that on your own time? I'd love to have him at the rim right now. How do you got to see it right now while we're trying to win Big 12 ball games? and I know they're probably tuned in.
Yeah, that's the rub. I mean, certainly. But I think there's probably an understanding during a recruitment, style of play, like, okay, what's my role? What are you? I'm sure there's probably some thought there, but I get what you're saying too.
Yeah. I didn't mean to turn this into 10 minutes of Toppen, but he's a very interesting subject, obviously, as we're getting into Big 12 basketball time of year. Jeremy asked about any chance that we're maybe understating his return from the injury, anything lingering there. And Jeremy also asked regarding the Iowa State matchup, can Tech have a chance to win if he's not making a bigger impact than what we've seen most recently?
I think he's fine. I mean, there may be some, because like you weren't getting the injury question when he played against UCF.
It didn't enter my mind.
He had 26 in that game, I think. Yeah, I mean,
26 and 10, I think.
I just think the sport is hard, and you start going up against, because I mean, he's at the top of the stat sheet when it comes to points and rebounds, and so many coaches go into, we've got to take the. I mean, what have we talked about with like Chance McMillan's ability on defense? I mean, like the Madsen kid at Utah, and then Richie Saunders for BYU. I mean, Chance McMillan held them 13 points below and I guess 12 points below their season averages. this is just where you're at. This is the level that you're playing at right now, and teams try to do things to take you away. Against BYU, he's going against Traore, is JT, and he's built kind of like a miniature version of Zion Williamson. He's not very tall, but he's he's legitimate, like 270. So it's a tougher matchup. He's other times he's going to deal with a lot of length and height that alter his shot and all those things. But yeah, I think, but foul trouble, that's going to be something worth monitoring. He's got to be careful because he's being asked to defend the post and doing it against that same 270-pound post player, or in some cases a 6'11", 7'1" player, and that's not necessarily fair. But this is and before we move on from JT,
hey, and you got to know you got Texas Tech on that jersey. They want to blow that whistle. They want to point your way. These guys, they get their kicks on making a call against the Red Raiders. So you got to know that too going in.
but you know what else we're seeing too, to wrap the JT conversation up, I think it's worth pointing out too.
First, today's episode brought to you by Rocket Money. And if you're lost in the subscription whirlwind, listen up. If you're like me, you've had a few subscriptions you didn't even realize you were still paying on. And that's where Rocket Money comes in, making it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and even helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit in 2025. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. For me, the subscription tracker is a must-have. Cancel services you're not using anymore and save a ton. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Just go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon.
To wrap the JT conversation up, I think it's worth pointing out too, your boy Federico is starting to kind of figure it out. He's getting a bit better, and there's some different things that he can do for you. I think at times you're still going to look to play these two together, but at times he's a better maybe option, maybe defensively, than JT. And I can't say that he hadn't been a better option in the last 2 or 3 games on offense than JT has, based on foul trouble or the way that a team is playing you and the way that they're playing the pick and roll with the lob threat. That's not JT's game. It is Federico's game. So, just as long as we all understand all the parts of this conversation.
I'm sure we'll all understand it clearly, keep this in mind the entire time, and therefore our takes on future basketball played by the aforementioned named individuals will be nothing but reasonable and based in reality. I'll make that promise on behalf of the Locked On Texas Tech fam family. Before you got to Federico, you were making another professional segue, because when you mentioned Chance McMillan, and we're thinking defense, of course, as we're going into this weekend against Iowa State. This question from Dean, sticking with Grant McCasland and the Red Raiders, said, the defensive identity of Grant McCasland, so much was made of the no middle defense. He says he's not a basketball X's and O's guy. So cross out Dean for being a basketball X's and O's guy. Not one. But he's curious if there's a name to the scheme he runs, if it's just rooted in toughness, or kind of what that means. And he also asked about Chance McMillan. Is he the lockdown guy defensively for Tech? Are we sticking him on the other team's best players?
I don't know if they don't play the no middle exact, and I don't know if anybody really does, because the rules changed. So much of that style of defense that Mark kind of came up with was about keeping people on the side and then forcing them to the baseline. And there were a lot of charges taken. I can't tell you the last time I saw a charge taken. They just don't call it anymore. They basically just said, it's almost all going to be a block. Like, to have a charge called, you literally have to be somewhere planted before somebody even takes off, and they just kind of plow into you and all these things. So that's kind of altered that scheme quite a bit.
Gutless, Chris. They don't want to make the most electric call in basketball. At least says the guy that was pretty much only good for a charge every once in a while. They're gutling. This is just taking, you know this, I know you do, taking the onus off of officials who are getting fooled too often. In my opinion, that's the summation of why we've evolved this way. I missed the charge, but Mark Adams in the Texas Tech defense of a year gone by broke it, apparently.
And I think people copied it. I think it used to drive everybody crazy. That whole thing. You're right. I mean, I don't disagree with anything that you said. Grant's always going to play man. I think there's some different principles. I don't know if if it's more of like a pack line, would be like maybe a term, but I that's a loose interpretation of, but so much of the way you play defense, you don't just say we play man. You don't say we have a version of man that we play, because so much of it too these days, it's based on what the opposition is trying to do to you and how you want to guard ball screens and things like that. Because sometimes you blitz it. Sometimes you play off of it. It all depends on the personnel and the player and the decision you make in that particular game. On if that player is hot or what his stats look like coming into it. There's so many little subtle, I mean, it's just crazy how basketball is played. It's just 5-on-5. It seems simple enough, but look, the subtle nuances of 2 steps this way, I want you turned this way, as opposed to, or setting a screen and you turn right around and you flip it and then you rescreen. I mean, there's just all kinds of, and all those little nuances is what decides games in many cases. Because most of these games are close, or, can you stop a run? Can you create a run? And it's based off of a play on how you decided to guard, or you're one of your guys doesn't pay attention to the scouting report and is like, I went over the screen instead of under it. Now we're burned. Now he hit a 3 on me and all that kind of stuff. So, but I mean, I don't know. I probably haven't answered the question, but there's not really a name for, I think, what they're trying to do. They borrow a little bit of everything, but so much of it is just toughness and willingness to move and understanding what your task is on who you're supposed to be guarding. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it.
All right. Appreciate that question. We'll switch gears and leave the basketball program for a moment, as we got a couple of folks asking Chris for a portal update. Some of these never stop partying portal sickos are still just out there getting down, waiting by the transfer portal wire for any breaking development. So guys like Ed and Ben, we had Charles, we had Jeremy, we had Seth, all checking in on the portal front, asking about any updates with recent visits or visits being planned. And also some names mentioned I want to throw at you. Mo Westmoreland, Jamori Robinson, Queese, Humphrey Grace. Now, are these names that they're trying to make me look foolish in that they are made up and fictional? Or are they real guys? Something I'm going to learn maybe with some others here as we get into this, Chris. But can you give us a pulse of the portal as we wrap up the week?
I still think some of this has calmed down a bit, but I think that you're not done yet. I'm not sure when I'm ready to or prepared to say that you're completely done and finished and all those things. As you get closer to the spring semester starting in another week or so, it could in fact be done for the time being, although you can still get a kid into school and in the semester, like well into when that semester started, based on online classes and what his situation would be. I mean, a week to 10 days even, I guess, if you had to stretch it that far. Because keep in mind, the 2 teams that will play for the national championship on January the 20th would have until the 5th, or 5 days after that, the January the 25th, to enter the portal and all those things. So, it's just, I mean, I still think edge help and receiver is where you would look to make, and there's some, seeing QB talk and stuff. I'm not sure, I think there was a QB that entered the portal a week or so ago, and there was some, I don't know. I don't know if I'm necessarily buying that, if you're just kind of like just checking in, if you're, so I don't know. I need to be careful about what I say here, but because I don't want anybody to get the wrong impression. But you're still, you've got an eye on everything and everyone involved, and if there is an upgrade, to be had, and it's a fit. I think your pot is committed. I think is the term that some internally have used. But I don't think you're going to be irresponsible with it or just spend money or buy just to do it. I think there needs to be some meaning and culture in mind and all those things. But and then there's obviously the spring portion of this deal too, which that'll be a lot of subtraction potentially as opposed to addition. But I just wouldn't rule anything out there either.
All right, appreciate the questions there. This question from Jack says, I'm not yet convinced we fully address the need at rush end and receiver, but no other opportunities will come in the spring. But are we in play for both of those positions now so that they could be a part of the spring? First, today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. And right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app giving you everything you need for live betting, same-game parlays, and a whole lot more. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com, and make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Rush end and receiver, but no other opportunities will come in the spring. But are we in play for both of those positions now so that they could be a part of the spring? Does that make sense?
I think that's fair. I don't think it's like an end-all be-all that you have to add at that right now. I think that there's a receiver that's still in the playoffs, or it depends on when somebody's watching this though. So I need to be careful about what I say that too, because that game may have been played and that team maybe won or lost, or whatever. But yeah, you're looking for juice on the edge. You're looking for speed at receiver. And I think in both cases, the receiver needs to be an older, like a 1 year option. I don't think you're necessarily looking for somebody that's got all, because I think you really like your youth there at that position. But I think if you could find somebody that could flat out run and that had some experience, I think that's a fit. And I think edge, like somebody that could get after the quarterback that's got some experience, and that would be like a 1 or 2 year guy. Because there was a player that was from Tennessee that was rumored to be visiting. He commits to Florida State. There was another one from, I think, UTEP. He's committed to Tulane. I think you could have gone there if you wanted to. There was another one from UTSA. And so there's, you've got a good feel for the landscape, and I just think you're trying to be smart with what you do here. And there's by no means like we have to have this and this, otherwise we're screwed. That's not the thought. Would you like to add at those two spots? I think that's probably fair. And then there's door number 3 with the potential other positions out there that you could just go, I don't know, let's just see what's going on.
Yeah.
So yeah,
we're just kicking tires. We're just checking in. We're just talking here. They're just talking. All right, thank you for that question. This question from Wallace: can you compare this portal offensive line class to the classes of the last 2 years?
Well, I mean, no, because I think in this case, you theoretically got exactly who you wanted. I don't think that has been stated in the previous 2 years or close to it. I think, and I think that the size and the experience and all the stuff. I mean, I think you've taken some. The thing about this, because we're just talking offensive line here, you've got a little mixture of, because I'm really excited about Howard Sampson, because I think he has a ton of upside. This is a potential draft pick, potentially high-end draft pick. If you can tap into him and he continues to progress at the arc that he's been going at, then you've got two really polished, finished products that are close to having NFL draft grades right now that have played at the group of 5 level, and you just didn't get those things before. You got good group of 5 players. These are draft guys right now, potentially late round or undrafted, but they're on the radar, or they're all conference or all American at the group of 5 level and things like that. And so I think this is quite a bit different. But you handpicked here. I mean, I think you had in some ways last year you kind of settled. I think you picked, and then you just kind of ended up with who you ended up with. I think Scurry was a pick, but I think you had to settle for a Maurice Rodriguez. You had to settle for maybe a Davion Carter, because some other folks either went to Colorado, one went to, I'm trying to remember where else, and then you had decided on Monroe Mills. Like, man, I just don't know. And so there's just a lot of unknowns last year. I think this one you went in with a much better plan and executed it flawlessly.
All right. Appreciate that question. We had Mike, we had Roger, we also had Linda, all asking for any update on Baron Morton's offseason timeline thus far.
No, I mean, he's last time, I went at the bowl game, which has been now, a couple weeks ago. He's just got to do some exercises. He's going to be around the team. I mean, you've heard Joey talk about how his role will be very important, in that he's going to be tasked with trying to bring this group together and create that sense of urgency and camaraderie and all the stuff. And it's a bit trickier for Baron, even though, because he can't play and can't throw, and he's not going to get to go through spring and all those things. But he's got a little red squishy ball on the end of his shoulder harness. He's got to do 1,000 squeezes a day, and he'll tell you he's going to do 2,000 a day, trying to do what he can to speed things up. I mean, so, the first team meeting will be next week on January the 14th. And away we go. But that's kind of what you're looking like. But he's still, he's 3 to 4 months away, at least, from being able to, you need to be thinking April, May, and that may be even too soon. It just depends on how things go here.
Gotcha. All right. Jason says, or asks for some thoughts on some of the portal guys that left and where they have landed. I don't know if they all have landed yet. Maybe they have, but any stand out to you so far?
Like of our guys that left? Yeah. I think it's worth noting that most of them spun down as far as the level of play. Nothing against this young man, and I don't mean this to be disrespectful, but I just thought it was interesting that Vanderbilt was jumping up and down at the addition of Sterling Porche on the offensive line. And I'm like, I mean, he tried to do what he could. He kind of had to play out of position here. But there's a reason that you kind of were like, hey, man, good luck to you. We appreciate what you did. But, and you need offensive line help as much as anybody. And you just let him walk right out the door. And I think you were okay with doing that. But most everybody else has gone to, Tulane, and like Houston saying the same thing about Dalton Merriman. Ty Buchanan going to Arizona. I mean, those are programs that I think that should tell you a lot about where those programs are. It doesn't mean that those guys will struggle or they'll be great or whatever. I'm just saying with some of these guys, and when you let them walk out the door, you've had as good a look at them as anybody. And maybe it's scheme, maybe it's who you're playing next to. I don't know, but those were kind of fascinating. But everybody else really spun down a level. You've got some guys at McNeese and ACU and Nevada and Tulane, and I'm trying to think of all the different, and they're like Harvey Dyson at the time you and I are sitting here talking, he hasn't committed anywhere. So past that, I don't have any thoughts. I did find it interesting on some of the offensive linemen though, where they ended up, but I think it's interesting because they all ended up at the Power Four, okay, of your transfers. And I think we would all agree that all three of them, okay, or maybe had flashes of being pretty good. But again, you were not committing to them. You were not. Like, if you're here, we hope you're a backup. That's what our hope would be. So if you want to stay, and they go and they're likely starting at, that's how much of a premium there is on offensive linemen and defensive linemen in general in the portal right now. And just, the need for those guys, because there's just not that many of them. But Arizona's looking at it and go, well, hell, you're an upgrade for us. Kind of thing. And Houston saying the same. And I guess Vandy saying the same thing. So anyways, sorry for the rant, but
that's what you're here for. Stuff those stories in a sack, Chris.
Yeah.
Appreciate that question. Appreciate that answer. This one from Michael, sort of along the same vein, I guess, as we're talking about players on the move, asking, are you surprised that there haven't been more Houston players that have made a move with Shield Wood?
No, I mean, I guess in some ways, yes, some ways, no. You ended up with one defensive lineman. I think I was thinking there would be one of those DBs. Now he ended up, I think, getting in the portal and then ended up, I think, getting out and staying at Houston. But Houston's just an interesting school from the standpoint of a lot of times those kids that are going to University of Houston, that's where they're from. They went to a high school nearby. And so it's not surprising that, and I think Willie Fritz does a really good job. And I don't know if I think you did just fine though, defensively, personnel wise in the portal. So, but I think you got somebody that you wanted. I think maybe there was an interest in another DB that was in the portal at one time for University of Houston, and they decided to stay. And maybe you found somebody that was better. I mean, Shield Wood would know as much as anybody. Hey, this guy's better than what I had. I don't know. I mean, that's.
Well, I think it could also be a byproduct of just timing, as far as you hire a guy from whatever place,
true,
and his arrival also coincides with the most motivated and well-resourced posse of portal Avengers ever assembled at Texas Tech. So the seats were at a much higher premium, when maybe in another offseason you're like, no, we would get some guys more or a longer look, I guess, maybe.
And don't rule that out as we go forward, even in the spring and even like next year. I mean, those connections are still there and the knowledge of personnel is still there. So, we wouldn't be finished with trying to answer this question, but I think the way the question was asked was more for the immediate.
Yeah.
But it did net you a really good defensive tackle that you're going to get for more than 1 year. And he's one of those that it's not going to get a lot of headlines, but I'm telling you, I mean, you added some juice with some of these guys that are not being talked about enough. And my headline of that list is the North Dakota State player Wisniewski. I mean, I'm telling you, so we'll see.
All right. Thank you for that question. This one from Glenn, asking about roster numbers. Any idea on how many will be sent down the road when the roster is set at 105? And do you think more broadly that FCS programs could stand to benefit from some of these limits? I wonder the same, elsewhere about Group of Five and things like that. Are we in for some type of trickle down effect?
I think, okay, so how many will you tell to that you don't have a spot for them? Is that what I'm hearing? You're going to be over 105 in the spring. That's a fact. Now, what is interesting to note is you may not even have, I don't know what the number would be, but you may have far less than that actually going through spring football, because you've got a lot of guys that are injured, like a Baron Morton, for example, a Duda Banks, for example, potentially a Chapman Lewis, for example, a Bryce Ramirez, for example, Justin Horn, for example. I mean, there's a variety of guys that I think you would like to keep and are planning on keeping. They won't go through spring football. So it's not like you're going to trot out 120 kids that are going to go through spring practices, but you will be over in total on purpose, just because you're going to treat it like a tryout in some ways. And I don't know where you'll land on that number. And I think some guys, maybe some of the upperclassmen that are more of your current walk-on types, they could decide, you know what, I'm probably just going to retire from football, or no, man, I'm going to go through spring and see what happens. There's some dynamics there that are in play, but you will have to have conversations, plural, with some players that you just don't have a spot for, and that's your decision. As far as your other point, absolutely, you will see a trickle down. The Division 2, 3, JUCO, Group of Five, everybody will see a somewhat of a benefit from that, and at some point there'll be kids at those levels that'll get squeezed, though. As guys start to spin down. I mean, like, there's probably like an offensive lineman at Abilene Christian right now that's like, okay, Caden Carr just showed up. Well, okay, so there goes my spot. I mean, it just pushes. I mean, anywhere it just kind of pushes
Yeah.
everything down, and so there's somebody on the end of at the end of that position group on every roster when guys show up that yeah. I mean, it's pyramid theory, right? So,
It's a competitive world out there.
yep.
Thank you for that question. This one from Matthew. Wanted to ask about the football staff replacing Kirk Bryant. And he also asked, will Coach Leftwich coach quarterbacks?
Like Zach Kitley did, he will have the most to do with it. But I think that Mac Leftwich will also probably have somebody like Kirk that is more of a day-to-day, minute-to-minute, whereas like Mac has more of a bigger picture, kind of like Zach did.
Okay.
With things. I don't know who this individual would be. It could be somebody internally already. It could be somebody, because there's quite a few roles. You got to replace Darcel's role as a lead analyst. You've got to replace Kirk Bryant's role. Harrison Hanna was a key figure in the day-to-day operations with everything and just the minutia of operating a football program 365 days a year. Brandon Lee was second in charge of the strength and conditioning program. And he went with the Coach Kitley. I mean, so there's a lot of those are actually pretty big roles, the ones I'm talking about. But there's even ones that are below that are still somebody is intrigued, and that'll be up to Coach Wood and obviously Coach Leftwich to kind of maybe surround themselves and give some guys some opportunities that they are familiar with, that know their stuff and all those things. But that's probably in the process of right now.
All right. Appreciate that question. Edward, Sammy, let's see here. Tyson kind of asking about this next stretch for Texas Tech basketball and maybe what we need to see for you to feel like, okay, could Tech join the ranks of conference title contender? I think it was, let's see here, Sammy asking if Tech just beats Iowa State on Saturday, would you kind of put them in that category? Do you play it a little more safe? Edward asking about how we would feel about a ceiling or a floor if you're able to be successful over these next few games. And I've got a hypothetical record for you. Would you go 2-2 over your next 4, or would you be a little greedier? What do you think about this stretch and maybe what it can say for where Tech winds up competing in the Big 12 Conference?
These are great conversations. I mean, I had somebody ask me this yesterday, and they said, "Hey, if you could go 12-8 in the league right now, would you take it?" I'm like, whoa. I mean, I probably would, and I'd probably be, shame on me for like willing to do that. But I mean, that's pretty good through 20 to 12 up, 8 down. When you've already dropped 1, that's 7 more losses, but that's a lot of good wins in that mix too. I don't know if you were to go 3-1 over your next 4. I would say, okay, now you've kind of weathered, because I mean your next 2 home games, man. Yeah. Iowa State is going to be just I mean, that place needs to be full. You're going to have to play your best game of the year to get it done. I mean, Iowa State is legit. They have depth, and we'll talk about that in another episode, talking about more about Iowa State. But and then Arizona comes in here, and they all of a sudden figured out that they were supposed to be a top 10 team in the preseason. They waited till the conference season started to a portion of the schedule to kind of remember that. But they look like the team that you were afraid of and that was making everybody know. Those are your 2 home games. The Kansas State game, they're a mess right now, and it's hard to win up there. Texas Tech hasn't won up there many times. Like I want to say like 3 or 4 at the most. And I've been a part of a couple of wins up there, but they're like 7-7 right now. They had talked about how this was Jerome Tang was like, this is the most talented team I've ever had. And then they just have not figured it out. I don't know what the deal is there. But then the other road game is the Cincinnati team that was ranked and just rolling in the non-conference. And then the conference schedule starts and it's like, okay, they turned into a pumpkin. So I don't know, will the real Cincinnati please stand up and stop putting chili on your spaghetti noodles up there? I don't know if I would take 2-2 because I do think you have a legit chance. If you are figuring it out, you do have a legit chance to go 3-1.
Yeah.
The toughest one of those 4 is going to be the home game versus Iowa State. The second toughest one may be the road trip to Cincinnati. And then the third toughest one is your home game versus Arizona. And it's It's going to sound stupid, but like the easiest one is in Manhattan, Kansas, and it will not, I repeat, not be easy.
No,
So,
not
but
that'll be easy.
that's what this league does to you. And then you look up, and if you dare exhale, you're going to screw it up, because you look up and on paper it's like TCU and Oklahoma State in back-to-back home games, and you know that's where you should have 1 week where you're like, okay, we put two together. So anyway, that's what it looks like. But I think you got a ways to go before you're in the Iowa State, Houston, Kansas conversation, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. But you got some opportunity in front of you.
Sure.
Here's a quick one for you from Leah. Is Matt Campbell going to the NFL?
I hope so, Leah. I would love nothing more.
I echo that as well.
I think he lost a coach in the last couple of days, and so people kind of wondering aloud, okay, do they know something? I think that he's 45. I think there's probably the same conversation. He could probably stay there for as long as he ever wanted. But if he's got another, if there's an itch there that he wants to scratch, I mean, at some point the calls will stop being made. I think his agent could have shut these things down, and yet I think there was rumors about a Jets interview, which the Jets were in it for the long run, because they like, hey, we'll just draft Breece Hall, and we'll draft Alan Lazard, we'll draft I forgot that they've got like 4 or 5 Iowa State dudes. Like, we'll just get a bunch of his guys, and then he'll have to interview with us, and maybe he'll say yes.
There you go.
And then the Bears are rumored to be interested, and depending on when people see this, maybe these situations are resolved. I don't know, but he's a Midwestern guy. And I've always thought like the Notre Dame, the Ohio State, if any of those, I mean, that would be like but the Bears from that standpoint would be a fit. And they finally have a quarterback in Caleb Williams. So I don't know. But I mean, I hope that somebody takes him. I would love nothing more. And
yes,
I hope they take
take
John Heacock with him too, that coaches defense, and then let Iowa State start all over and have to give the baton back on the relevancy baton, and let the rest of us eat some.
All right. Appreciate you guys for being out there and all the questions. Thanks so much for sending those in. And shout out to all the Matador Mobsters. If you're interested in becoming one, hit the show notes, find the link there for a free trial. It's your direct line to Chris and myself with one-on-one text sent straight to your phone. Good stuff as always, Chris. Appreciate the time, man. And we'll see you for the next one.
Sounds good, man. Always appreciate the questions. Love the feedback. These are always, never know which direction we're going to go with these. Apologies for being long-winded at times, but keep the questions coming. And these are a lot of fun, but guns up, everybody.
Everybody stay warm, and of course, warm up by the fire of being subscribed on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts so you never miss an episode. For Chris, I'm Casey. Thanks for being out there, and we hope to see you back for the next round on Locked On Texas Tech.